He saw the plane's silhouette only for a second, black against the moonlit clouds, banking hard to the left. The radio crackled with static, the sky alive with tracer fire, and in that brief heartbeat, instinct took over. He squeezed the trigger. The .50 caliber guns thundered, cutting through the night like lightning across the soul of the world. Seconds later, a ball of flame bloomed in the distance, and a voice whispered through the headset, "Hit confirmed." He never knew until morning that the man he had shot down was his own brother. They had grown up together in the quiet plains of Kansas, chasing model planes through wheat fields, dreaming of flying side by side in the real thing. When the war came, those dreams turned to duty. Both became pilots, one flying P-51 Mustangs for the 8th Air Force, the other piloting a B-17 in the same theater. They wrote letters home, sometimes crossing in the mail, promising they'd meet somewhere over Germany. But war has a way of swallowing even the purest promises. On that winter night in 1944, the sky over the Ruhr Valley was chaos. Hundreds of aircraft, smoke, flares, and confusion. Identification lights failed, radio codes blurred, and friend and foe became indistinguishable. The older brother, leading a night interception patrol, had one order: shoot anything without signal confirmation. He saw a blip on the radar, closing fast, no reply on the radio. The decision took 3 seconds. The consequence would last a lifetime. At dawn, the wreckage was found in a forest outside Essen. A single dog tag lay among the charred metal. The name was familiar, painfully so. And when the pilot who had fired the fatal rounds was called to the briefing room, no one spoke. The silence said everything. He walked out without a word, into a world that suddenly felt colder than the war itself. He didn't sleep that night. No one did. The squadron's tent was heavy with a silence so dense it seemed to hum. Outside, engines coughed, mechanics shouted, life went on, but inside, time froze. The major handed him a cigarette and said nothing. What could be said? There were no regulations for this, no words to fit the shape of such a wound. The official report called it an operational loss, a simple phrase meant to bury complexity beneath protocol. But inside, something hollowed out and stayed there. He tried to write home, to his mother, to explain, to confess, but every word died before reaching the page. He was shot down in combat, was all the telegram said. He knew she'd light a candle for one son, never knowing she'd lost 2. Rumors started among the pilots. Some whispered it had been bad luck. Others said command was hiding the truth to keep morale intact. He heard his name in half-spoken conversations, in the hush that followed when he entered the mess hall. The war demanded silence. It did not have room for guilt. But guilt came anyway, relentless, patient, like a shadow that refused to fade. Days later, the squadron psychologist, a weary captain who had seen too many young men crack, asked him if he wanted to talk. He stared at the man for a long time and finally said, "What's there to talk about? I pulled the trigger. That's all there is." But the truth was heavier than those words. At night, when the airfield quieted, he would walk out to the runway and stare into the dark horizon where the flares once burned. He imagined his brother's last moments, confusion, terror, maybe forgiveness. The cold wind cut across his face like the truth itself, sharp and endless. And when morning came, he'd put on his flight jacket, climb into the cockpit, and pretend the world still made sense. The inquiry began quietly, behind closed doors. Officially, it was a review of night operations over the Ruhr. But everyone knew what it really was, a search for blame that no one wanted to claim. A few officers gathered in a cramped operations room, cigarette smoke curling through the air as they studied maps and logs. His name appeared again and again in the reports, next to a single phrase, possible friendly fire incident. He was called in for questioning 3 times, each time the same questions: altitude, identification signal, visual confirmation. Each time his answers were calm, mechanical, like a man reading his own obituary. No response on radio. No signal lights visible. Hostile trajectory. The words came out steady, but inside, his chest burned. They asked him if he had any reason to think the aircraft might have been friendly. He looked at the officer across the table, a young man who hadn't seen combat, and said softly, "I had every reason to hope it wasn't." A week later, the report was classified. No fault assigned. The military could not afford a scandal, not when morale was already fragile. The papers were filed away, stamped, and buried in archives that no one would open for decades. Officially, the brothers had died heroes, one shot down by the enemy, the other still flying missions for freedom. But among the squadron, the truth lived in whispers. Pilots who had seen the radar returns, who knew the confusion that night, avoided his eyes. Some pitied him. Others feared what guilt might drive a man to do. He kept flying, not because he wanted to, but because grounding himself felt like surrender. He told himself the war needed him, that maybe by surviving, he could make his brother's death mean something. On his next mission, he flew alone longer than he should have, searching the clouds as if for forgiveness. Every flicker of light, every glint of aluminum in the distance, made his hand tremble near the trigger. In war, hesitation kills, but after that night, pulling the trigger felt like dying twice. He completed 20 more sorties before the end of the war. No medals, no speeches, just a quiet transfer and a record marked honorable service. But the truth has a way of waiting. When the war ended, the world erupted in noise. Bells, parades, flags waving in streets filled with strangers hugging each other like family. But for him, there was only silence. He stood on the pier in New York Harbor as the ship docked, uniform pressed, eyes hollow. Around him, men cheered, laughed, wept. He couldn't join them. Victory felt like a language he'd forgotten how to speak. Home was quieter than he remembered. His mother had aged 10 years in 3, her smile trembling each time she looked at him. She asked about his brother often, voice careful, gentle, as if the wrong word might break something between them. He told her what she needed to hear, that he was brave, that he didn't suffer, that he died quickly. She nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks, whispering, "At least you came back." He couldn't meet her eyes. The neighbors called him a hero. They brought casseroles, shook his hand, asked about the war like it was a movie they'd missed. He smiled politely, gave them short answers, and slipped away whenever he could. At night, he sat on the porch staring at the horizon, hearing engines in the wind, seeing fire behind closed eyes. He kept the telegram folded in his jacket pocket, the one announcing his brother's death. The paper was soft from being unfolded, read, and refolded. He'd memorized every word. Sometimes he'd imagine writing another one that told the truth. But what good would that do now? The war had already stolen everything it could. He tried to find work as a flight instructor, but the smell of aviation fuel made him nauseous. He quit for a week. Eventually, he took a job at a hardware store, fixing things that were small and quiet, things that didn't explode when you touched them. He spoke little, laughed less. People said he was a bit strange since the war, the kind of phrase America used to describe the broken. In 1951, when his mother died, he found among her belongings a photograph. 2 boys in flight jackets, smiling, their arms over each other's shoulders. On the back, in her handwriting, "My wings." He traced the words with his thumb and realized for the first time that she had known. Maybe not the details, but something deeper. Mothers always do. He buried her next to his brother, then stood alone between the 2 graves. The wind carried the sound of a passing plane overhead, and he looked up, not with anger, not even sorrow, but something quieter, the kind of silence that only comes when guilt has run out of words. The years passed, but the war never left him. It just changed shape, fading from gunfire to memory, from sound to silence. In the daylight, he managed. He fixed roofs, mowed lawns, joined the local veterans post for poker nights he rarely spoke through. But at night, when the world grew still, the sky came alive again. He would wake to the sound of engines that weren't there, the flash of tracer rounds behind his eyelids. Sweat soaked the sheets. His hands trembled. Sometimes he'd whisper into the dark, as if calling through static, "Break formation, turn back, please." He never married. A few tried to reach him, kind women, patient smiles, but something in him was unreachable. He was polite, gentle even, but always elsewhere. One of them once told him, "You live like you're waiting for a signal that never comes." She was right. He was waiting, though he couldn't.